criminal defense attorney, Neil Rockheim.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Killer Cross-Examination. I sat there watching an interview by Gayle King of CBS, and she's interviewing this woman who is accused of assault and in essence falsely accusing a 14-year-old teenager in a New York hotel of stealing her phone. She ran up to the kid, accused him, jostled him, grabbed him, assaulted him, was hostile to him, and then the kid denied it, and the kid's dad gets involved and throws her to the ground and defends his son. And as it turns out, he didn't have her phone at all. I don't want to talk about the theft or the allegation of theft or the assault or the phone. I want to talk about what the woman and her lawyer did afterwards by going on CBS and actually participating in an interview. What were they thinking? What in the world was she thinking? What in the world was her lawyer thinking? As someone that has had his fair share of cases in the news and has had many cases that people consider to be high profile cases, I can tell you right now that an interview with your client and you with the media while the case is either pending or before there's a charge is an awful idea. If there's a list of 100 things that are bad ideas, this is something that is so bad, it's like it should be number one on the lawyer don't do list. Like when you're thinking about don't punch your lawyer or don't punch your client, don't hit your client in the back of the head. That goes without saying. Right below don't hit your client in the back of the head is don't sit for an interview with your client and someone in the media. And this is coming from someone that's in the media. You want to know why? Because look at what happened during her interview. I mean, her interview was a disaster. She's accused of assaulting a kid, a teen. She's accused of racial profiling. She's accused of jumping to the conclusion of blaming a black teenager because she looked around, didn't see her phone, and decided that he was the most likely culprit with no evidence and no reason to believe that he had done it whatsoever. Zero evidence. Zip, zero, zilch, nada. And she went on I don't even know what she was trying to gain, but she went to do this. If it was a public relations effort, it was a public relations disaster. I mean, she might as well have lit herself on fire on television. Or she might as well have poured gasoline on herself and her lawyer lit her on fire. And I want to talk about how there are lawyers that call me. There are people that call me to take on potential cases, and they say, Neil, it's a high-profile case. It's a high-profile case. Neil, this is a natural for you because it's in the media, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, you don't seem to understand. That's not how this works. When she sat down, when her lawyer had her sit down for that interview, if their goal was to improve her public image, that's not going to do it. If her goal was to get her story out, that's not going to do it. All it's going to do is open her up to inconsistencies, contradictions, to having to explain herself, to be on the defensive. You know, the old saying is if you're explaining, you're losing. Well, in an interview like that, all you're doing is explaining. You know, there's something called the Barbra Streisand effect, which is a story years ago where Barbra Streisand complained that the news media was publishing photographs about her house, and she issued a statement and complained and said, "Stop looking at my house." In the meantime, all it did was take what was perhaps a a one day or a few hour story about her home and turned it into Barbara Streisand complaining about her house being in the news. And that was picked up by everybody, and it became known as the Barbara Streisand effect. You can actually take a story that would have, that is a story, but you can turn it into even more of a story by talking about it. And any lawyer that sits down and tells someone like her, this is a good idea, is making a tremendous mistake. Look, are there some rare circumstances where a person could sit down, a lawyer could advise their client to sit down and be interviewed? Sure. But that would have to be so practiced. That would have to be so prepared. You'd have to have the reporter just right. You'd have to ensure that you to know what the questions were in advance. And there's no reporter that's going to agree to that. And so by sitting your client, as a lawyer, by having your client sit down, what you really do is you open your client up to being cross-examined, contradicted, and exposed in front of millions upon millions of people. And that video is going to be exhibit number 2 in a trial, in her trial. Exhibit 1 will be the video from the hotel, and exhibit 2 will be the video of her interview with Gayle King. I mean, think about some of the things, because all you're doing is basically exposing your client to making admissions. If you're hoping to get some public relations, some public relations assistance out of that, or you're trying to restore an image, that's not going to do it. The story is bad enough. All you can hope to do is let it die. Let it go away. Maybe one day, long time down the road, maybe you can offer up some kind of well thought of, meaningful, sincere apology. But this interview, this early, and her lawyer let her do it, disaster. Why didn't her lawyer just give her a sign that she could hold up that said, I'm guilty and I'm an asshole? Because what the interview, no matter how long it is, and I watched it, the fact of the matter is that what you come away with after watching the video is she's guilty and she's an asshole. That's what that attempt at public relations did for the client. It took this entire incident where maybe she could offer some heartfelt apology down the road, and it condensed it into 2 things. I did it, and I'm an ass. Here are some of the things, if you guys have followed the story, here are some of the things that Gayle King, who did a remarkable job questioning her, some of the things that she was caught admitting on tape. Let's see. She tried to offer an explanation that the reason why she stopped this young teen was because she was stopping anyone who was leaving the hotel. But then Gayle King said, yeah, but you didn't stop everybody, did you? And she admits, no, just the people. And then she took a break, stopped, and said she wanted to do her part. So basically, why did you stop him? I offered a reason, and that reason proved to be untrue, is what the Gayle King revealed. So she had no reason to stop the kid other than just pure racial profiling. Then she called it a mistake. Then when pressed about whether she assaulted him, she ultimately turned the table and tried to say that the kid's dad had assaulted her and put her to the ground. And then Gayle King wisely called her out and said, yeah, but you grabbed his son. And she goes, well, yeah. And then at one point, she says, I think you should just, you say that you shouldn't you apologize? Well, I've apologized, but you attacked his son. And she goes, yeah. And then when Gayle King started to try to press further, she did this. Gayle, enough. Like, if you're trying to destroy what's left of what little reputation you have, this is the way to do it. If you're trying to ensure that your client's reputation is destroyed even further from an awful incident, this is the way to do it. If you're trying to ensure that your client confesses to the commission of a crime and has absolutely almost no ability to engender sympathy down the road, this is how to do it. In watching that interview, I wouldn't know whether the lawyer who was sitting next to her was her lawyer, or whether that was someone who really hated her and wanted to see this girl subjected to humiliation, scorn, and a public confession. Because that's what happened in that interview. Think about Jerry Sandusky. I mean, Jerry Sandusky took part in a public interview. He was the Penn State University, a defensive coordinator who was convicted in one of the accused and ultimately convicted in one of the largest pedophilia cases brought in the state of Pennsylvania. A very high-profile case, destroyed the reputation of the university football program for years, destroyed the reputation of their coach, Joe Paterno, destroyed the lives of many of the young people who were victims of Jerry Sandusky's sexual abuse. And he sat down for an interview with Bob Costas. I mean, again, if the goal is to get your story out there, it's not the time, it's not the place, it's not going to work. If your story is that you want to rehabilitate your public image, you're only ensuring that what little public image, positive public image you have left, if you have any, is going to be destroyed by the time you're done with the interview. And just like this woman recently, Jerry Sandusky did just that. In an interview with Bob Costas, he admitted to showering and horsing around with kids. I mean, this is a grown adult admitting that he takes showers with kids after workouts, that he hugs them in the shower. He admits in the shower that he's showering and horsing around. He admits that they're sliding across the floor in horseplay. He admits, well, I mean, I shouldn't have showered with those kids. Really? That's it? I mean, yeah, showering with the kids is pretty bad. I mean, it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 bad. I mean, this is like bad. And you're in a criminal case coming and you admit to showering with them. That's a really disturbing image. A grown man, a football coach, showering with kids. That's disturbing, and you're admitting to it. Not just admitting to it, then you're admitting that it was fun. Like, if you're I know that there's Miranda warnings where the police are supposed to warn people about their right to remain silent and their right to a lawyer and their right to stop questioning. We give people Miranda warnings when they're in custody because that's an inherently coercive environment where a lot of people are going to be afraid to say, no, I don't want to talk to you, the police. But these are people who are voluntarily giving taped interviews about very difficult, awful circumstances and thinking that they're going to rehabilitate their image, they're going to help their case. All you're doing, I mean, when you're a prosecutor and you hear that the defendant or the accused is going on the news to talk about the case, you do this. You rub your hands together in glee. You record it. You get your popcorn and you have your investigators take notes and you sit there and you eat, you're just popping the popcorn in because you can't believe this person is doing something so stupid. I mean, I don't even know how to characterize it other than saying it's stupid. You might as well hold up a sign that says, I'm an idiot and I did this. If you think you're going to go into an interview with an experienced interviewer like Bob Costas, who's done this is his job, is to conduct difficult interviews with controversial subjects and controversial topics, and to do it in a way that is entertaining. So he's not going to come across like an asshole, but he's going to push and be persistent, and he knows, and he's prepared. What did you think he was going to ask you, Jerry Sandusky? I mean, do you think he was going to ask you just one question, like, are you a sexual deviant? No, of course not. I would never do that. I mean, he's going to push. And he asked Sandusky about a statement made by another person in the football program about showering with kids. And Sandusky admits to horseplay. I mean, I don't even, it's all so bad. Each and every statement is bad. The fact that he showered with kids is bad. The fact that he admitted to showering with kids is bad. The fact that he admitted to horsing around like it was somehow like fun is bad. I mean, it's all bad. And if you admit that you showered with kids on a TV show, it really does answer the question that I guess there's really not much that you won't do with those kids, is there? It pretty much answers that question. You've admitted to something that's so bizarre and grotesque and weird, and it didn't help you at all. And then he says, I don't know what to say. I would just say that if somehow people could hang on until my attorney has a chance to fight, for my innocence, that's about all I could ask right now. It's obviously a huge challenge. You're talking about your innocence and saying that you're admitting that it's going to be a huge challenge to show that you're innocent. You just did an interview, dude. I mean, you just admitted to some pretty gross stuff. But that last sentence in the interview is awful too. It just goes to show you that when you sit down with the media thinking that you're gonna use them for a purpose to improve your case, they're using you to help not just expose your guilt, but they're using you to get to the truth, and they're using you for views and for news. And to get in there and say, just wait until my lawyer gets a chance to fight. So you want to hide behind your lawyer. You go on an interview and you can't explain yourself sufficiently enough to reveal that you're innocent, or to establish some doubt, or to show that you've got some decent character. We need to wait for your lawyer for you to make your case. What a disastrous interview. And those are just two of them. How about Robert Durst? Robert Durst, the multi-millionaire who beat a murder case in Texas and then ended up being the subject of that documentary called The Jinx. He did two things. I mean, there was a discussion he sent a letter that ultimately was used to establish a handwriting sample. And he was shown a letter that had been sent, there's a woman who was close to him was murdered outside Los Angeles. And there's a letter that was sent to the news, I believe the police department, that said cadaver. And it had a certain type of print on it. And Durst did an interview in 2015 where he was asked about that letter. And he said that letter only the killer could have written that letter. Then he took part in this documentary where over the course of the documentary, other handwriting of his is discovered, and it matches exactly the handwriting on this letter that he says had to have been written by the killer. Not just that, but as he's being interviewed and questioned about it, he walks away, goes into the bathroom, and he, to himself, while he's still mic'd up, so a hot mic, he admits that, because what happened to them all? I killed them all, of course. He admits to killing them. All because he was taking part in this interview, this documentary, which I presume he took part in to try to clear his name, or for fame, or for public relations purposes. Look, I could go story after story, case after case after case of people that have made the decision, sometimes with their lawyer, to sit down with the news and be interviewed about a pending case or an open investigation. I mean, when I see the lawyer sitting there next to their client, I think, does your lawyer not like you very much? I mean, does your lawyer not want to help you? I mean, I've been involved in some of the larger high-profile cases in this area for several years. A couple in particular, very high-profile cases, we were asked to sit down and take part in interviews. I refused. And I can tell you, in a couple of those cases, our clients were acquitted. And I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why. One of the reasons why we don't do that is that I have some clients who want to do it. Like, oh yeah, we should tell our side of the story in an interview. It's because once I sit down with my client in an interview with a reporter, guess what? I mean, there's no control. The client could say anything. The reporter could ask any question. The reporter could ask a loaded question unrelated to the case. Could be a financial case, and the reporter could say, we've had rumors, when did you stop beating your wife, sir? You're literally putting your client, exposing your client. And if you're the client, you're exposing yourself to being shredded and taken apart. If we tell you that it is in your best interest when you come into contact with law enforcement to assert your right to remain silent and assert your right to a lawyer so that you don't find yourself in a position to make any compromising statements or contradict yourself or contradict the evidence that's out there, then certainly don't walk into an interview with the media and do it yourself. And if you're a lawyer, do whatever you have to do to stop your client from doing it. And if your client insists on doing it, tell your client, I am not going to sign your death warrant. I'm not going to take part in the purge that is about to occur if you do this interview. It was already difficult enough for me to defend you in the case, but now there's no evidence of your statements, no evidence of your demeanor, there's no evidence of the way you really sound and feel about this, and you now want to put all of that out there in front of the public for the world to see. No, thank you. My job is tough enough. I watched that interview, and if she had done that interview on her own, I would have thought that was disastrous. But when I sit there and I watch that she had a lawyer sitting there next to her, I thought to myself, I wanted to hit the television and wake up the lawyer sitting there and say, hello, what the fuck are you doing? Stop her. Cut this off. It was a bad idea to begin with. It's become an even worse idea now that you're 7 minutes into it. Stop it. She didn't do it. So that interview with Gayle King is now going to become the second piece of overwhelming evidence in this case in New York. Just like the interview with Jerry Sandusky and Bob Costas became evidence in Jerry Sandusky's case. And just like in Robert Durst's murder case, Robert Durst's interview, his statements to these these journalists, documentarians, and his statement when he's talking to himself is going to be exhibits numbers 1, 2, and 3. I mean, if you want to plead guilty, just walk into the courtroom and plead guilty. Don't put us through the whole rigmarole of public facing and then an attempt to defend yourself at trial. If you want to plead guilty, walk into the courtroom and plead guilty. Because what you're doing when you're taking part in a public interview like that is you're basically pleading guilty. And if your lawyer is taking part in it, your lawyer is basically pushing you out there to take the arrows. And that's exactly what happened. This is Neil Rockine. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Killer Cross-Examination.